We are going to talk about Chapter 8, Environmental Health and Toxicology. What are the learning outcomes of this chapter? We are going to understand what is environmental health, what are the health risks that are posed to us because of the bad environmental health, and what are emerging diseases and how do we see their frequency more now? What human factors are involved in this trend? And Paracelsus said that the dose makes the poison. We are going to understand what does that mean and what makes some chemicals dangerous and others harmless, and what is the uh, influence of the risk that we perceive, what factors basically are responsible, how we can influence the risk. So, if we look at this case study, once there, the once and the future pandemic, and we see about the most emerging viruses that we are seeing in the recent times, especially the COVID-19 virus. We saw how it stalled the whole world, how that pandemic got the whole world to the standstill, right? So some of the emergent viruses would be like Ebola, which emerged in 2014 in West America, and then the SARS virus. I think it was around 2000. 7 or 9, and then of course the most detrimental was the SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID-19 virus. We know how these emerging viruses are mutating, and they are jumping from one another species, like bat in case of the COVID virus, how they jump from the bat to the human beings. So now we know that what kind of threat these emerging diseases are caused us, looking at the loss of economy, loss of the normal life that we had to face for those 3 years from 2019 till roughly 2022 until we got the vaccine in. So when we define environmental health, what is health? Health doesn't mean just a state of being physically active or healthy. It also involves the mental as well as the social well-being of a person. Just not having a disease or not being sick or ill doesn't mean that we have a perfect health. Health also involves the mental as well as the social well-being, along with the physical state of a person. Okay, let's define a disease. Disease is an abnormal change in the body's condition that impairs important physical or psychological functions. Now, what is morbidity? Morbidity means illness, and mortality means death, when a disease leads to the death of a person. So, in totality, what do we mean by environmental health? And environmental health focuses on the factors that cause disease, and it also includes the social, cultural, not natural, as well as the technological world that we are living in. You know how much technological advancements have been done, and you know how the technology has changed our life. You know how everybody is pretty much hooked to their computers, to their cell phones. So technology is also affecting our health a lot. People are becoming less and less social. They don't want to interact with other people because they are so much consumed by the technology. Imagine you guys. You guys are always on TikToks or Snapchats, sending message right and left to your friends. You don't want to miss a beat. If somebody responds to you, compliments you on a picture, you want to right away send them the reply back, either by symbols or just sending a text message. So you can see how everybody, especially the Gen Zs, are so much involved with the technology these days, right? Now, what are the major sources of environmental health? So, of course, the microbes like bacteria, viruses, protozoans, right? They and other infectious agents, definitely they are one of the major source of uh, causing a disease. But apart from that, the other things that influence our health are like pollution, like radiation, like the presence of toxins in our everyday world. And also, mortality is also caused by trauma, like crashes, car crashes, or accidents that happen. So, when we will talk about all this overall, how these things, all these factors, all these little puzzle pieces, they are affecting our environmental health overall. Okay. So the global disease burden is changing. If we, the health agencies now are calculating daily, which is an acronym. And if we expand the acronym, that means disability adjusted life years as a measure of disease burden. Okay. So health organizations are focusing on the leading causes of the death. And that is what the measure of the world health, and that is what the disease burden. It's changing because the world is undergoing a dramatic transition, like chronic conditions, like diabetes, like cancer, like cardiovascular diseases, they are no longer only afflicting the rich people. They are also now seen in the middle class or the lower class populations. And also the traditional killers like the infections or the perinatal or the maternal complications during birth and other nutritional deficiencies, they are still present. So those traditional killers is not like they are completely eliminated. They are still present. If we don't see much of these traditional killers in America, definitely in our European Western world, but we definitely see them in the developing countries like Asia and Africa. We still have people who have a lot of nutritional deficiencies, and they get diseases like kwashiorkor, marasmus, and many other of these type of diseases. Now, chronic conditions usually outweigh the infectious diseases. And when we say that, the global disease burden is ranked by percentage of daily, and that is, if we see in compare the 1990 disease burden with 2019, we will see that childbirths were the main cause of the daily percent rank was 9.4, and heart disease came after that, which was 9%. But if we compare with 2019, heart disease is the major cause, and it went up from 9.4% to 13.3%. So this tells us that the heart disease or CV diseases are the major causes of even more than the infectious diseases. And if we look at the next ones, in 1990, respiratory disease like TB was responsible of causing 8.6%, right? And and if we compare with 2019, it went way down to the fifth level, and the percentage decreased considerably from 8.6, it went to 3.6. That means we have made some strides in controlling the respiratory diseases like tuberculosis. So it is under control, right? But other things have changed. Like we can see diabetes, tumors, they have increased their percentage, daily percentage has increased to roughly 4%, right? So these diseases were much at the much lower level, like they were just present. Diabetes was present only 2% daily value, and tumors were just 2.5%. So that's how we can see that this graph, these daily percentage of daily has decreased, has changed a lot. I wouldn't say decrease, but it has changed because of the medical facilities that healthcare has become a little bit better, and we have gotten more technology, more control on some of the diseases. But at the same time, heart diseases, they have increased, right? And then if you look at malnutrition, so malnutrition was at 3%, whereas now malnutrition is just 1.8%. So this shows that we have controlled this. Also, we have tried to make, our agriculture has advanced so much so that we can give now proper, we can supply surplus of food is being produced, and we are delivering it to the malnutritioned population. So that's why that number has come down. Okay, so this is the change in the global disease burden that we can see from 1990 compared to 2019. But if we see, infectious diseases are still killing millions of people. And if we look at this chart, this is a billboard in Guatemala that encourages parents to vaccinate their child, because still 3 million children are dying because of these diseases that can be easily prevented, like tetanus, like diphtheria, polio, tuberculosis, and whooping cough and scarlet fever. We have tried to control, we have vaccines for them. When a child is born, we usually, they are vaccinated with TTAP, TD8, which is tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, and so many other like MMR. So these kind of diseases are easily preventable if a child is given a vaccination at an early stage of their life, so that they can be infectious disease can be prevented. But again, pathogens are the disease. We know the disease causing agents are the pathogens, and these pathogens are like bacteria, like viruses, like single-celled protozoans, and some worms and flukes. So the greatest loss of life from an individual disease in a single year was the Spanish flu pandemic that occurred in 1918. Okay, so epidemiologists estimate that at least 1/3 of all human beings at the time were infected, and between 50 to 100 million people, they died. Businesses, schools, sports, events, everything shut down for months. There were worries that this H1N1 pandemic that spread around the world in 2009 might sicken 2 billion people and would bring the economy to a standstill. Fortunately, it did not turn out to be that bad. like the 1918 influenza strain, the Spanish flu that we know of. So these viruses that belong to the influenza family, they mutate very fast and they move from wild animals to the domestic animals, and from there they can move to humans. And that's why it's very important to control them. So similarly, emergent diseases, like we said, that were previously absent. What are emergent diseases? Emergent diseases are those diseases that were absent for at least 20 years. They are, when they all of a sudden appear, that's when we can say these are called emergent diseases, like the bird flu, H1N1 new strain of the bird flu that spread in the world in 2009. That would be considered an emergent disease. And and in 2014, there was Ebola virus and Marburg fever. There were 40 outbreaks of these two over the past 2 decades. So that tells us that although we think we have controlled these diseases because of the vaccinations that we are giving uh, to the population, but still here and there they emerge. And that reason can be attributed to some people who refuse to get vaccinated. So when they get infected, that's how these diseases emerge in this population. Okay, so if we look at this map, this is the outbreak of the infectious diseases, some of the recent outbreaks of the diseases that happened all over the world. I can highlight some of them, like Chagas disease. It had an outbreak in 2013 in the US, and then in 2014, measles appeared. Few cases of measles appeared in 2014, and bourbon virus appeared in Kansas in 2014, and then chikungunya occurred in the Caribbean islands in 2013, and also in some parts of India, you can see swine flu appeared in 2015 and avian flu in China in 2017. Mumps appeared in Europe in 2012. So, like we said, even with the vaccinations, MMR, measles, and mumps, they should have been controlled, right? But they still appear, and that's why these are called emerging diseases, and their outbreak happened in those areas. In 2014, we can see Ebola emerged in Liberia, the West Africa, and then Zika virus appeared in Brazil in 2016. So the spread of Ebola in West Africa, it shows us how rapidly this disease can spread. Ebola is caused by a virus that is called filovirus, and they cause high fever and diarrhea followed by acute bleeding. Spread is rapid from person to person and through contact of the infected bodily fluids like blood, saliva, semen. So that's how it spreads. Now, novel diseases also threaten the wild species. So, humans are not the only ones who suffer from these new and emergent diseases. Wildlife also experience these epidemics, and they are sometimes called ecological diseases. We are now recognizing that the delicate ecological balance we should be valuing it high. It can disrupt very frequently, and these are important to our own health. Like conservation medicine attempts are done to understand how these environmental changes threaten our own health as well as that of natural communities on which we depend for ecological services. Okay. Bec- uh, like one of the examples we can give is a fungal disease that the frogs and toads are succumbing to this deadly disease. This fungal disease is called chytridiomycosis, and it has caused dramatic losses or extinctions, large scale extinction of the frogs and toads throughout the world. And it is caused by the fungus known as Batrachochytrium dendrobetidis. 6,000 amphibian species appear to be susceptible, and 2,000 species have declined or have become extinct in their native habitats as part of the global epidemic. So this tells us that it's not just the humans, but other animal species also are prone to these diseases. Now, what do we understand by superbugs? Like, how does superbugs happen? How do they happen? So this we are understanding that the overuse of certain types of antibiotics is basically over, and pesticides and insecticides that we use for plants, for our crops, agricultural crops, they are basically creating these superbugs, which are basically resistant to these diseases. So in recent years, we know that MRSA, which is a methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So this is a Staphylococcus aureus which has emerged as resistant to this antibiotic called methicillin. And this MRSA is very much present in the hospitals. So if no matter how high of a dose of methicillin you give to control Staphylococcus aureus bacteria, it is not gonna it's not gonna die. It's not, we can still see, because it's highly resistant to methicillin antibiotic. And same way, we can talk about the malaria parasite, which has become resistant to all these pesticides as well as the antibiotics, because we have used these things, basically not used but overused these pesticides to protect our crops and antibiotics to protect the human beings. So main reason is that these organisms evolve very rapidly, and that happens due to the natural selection. And we know that natural selection is the survival of the fittest organism, right? When there are few species, they are all they are all competing with each other, right? So the one that is most fit is going to survive, and that fittest organism is going to grow and reproduce and will produce the next generation. This thing is called natural selection. So nature selects the fittest form. So those bacteria or pests that could survive the methicillin or any other antibiotic for that matter, or any pests that those pests could any pesticide those pests could survive, they are now fit, and they are going to be selected by nature, which is called natural selection, and they are going to reproduce and produce the next generation. And that's how antibiotic resistance spreads among the population. So this slide will show us how these antibiotic resistance is acquired by these microbes. Okay, so mutation of the bacteria is very common, right? And then selection of these drug-resistant strains is going to happen. So if you see, this is a bacterial colony, and a mutation occurs in this particular bacteria where my mouse is on, and now this particular mutation, this one is going to be resistant to the antibiotic, right? Now, this will be now considered natural selection. Every other bacteria has died because of the effect of the antibiotic, but this one is resistant to the bacteria. So this one is going to grow, develop, and obviously it's going to reproduce the next generation. So now we see we got this resistant colony of bacteria which is resistant to this antibiotics, and this is the one which is going to now reproduce over and over again and produce another resistant colonies. And this tells us how these become superbugs basically, right? And also the other way that bacteria can transfer the drug resistance by a process by which they reproduce, it's called conjugation. So what happens in conjugation is that if there is a drug resistant bacteria and there is a harmful bacteria, so during conjugation, the bacterial chromosome exchanges its genes with the other bacteria, and in this case it is the harmful bacteria. So now that harmful bacteria acquired this drug resistant gene. So even now when this is going to reproduce, all this colony is going to be resistant to the antibiotic because this antibiotic resistant gene is acquired by this bacteria, and now when it produces its next progeny, all of them are going to have that antibiotic resistant gene in them, and they are going to proliferate and grow, and that's how they become superbugs. Make sense? So these are the two ways, A and B, that this antibiotic resistance is acquired by these microbes like bacteria. Now we are going to focus on some environmental toxics, and the study of toxins is called toxicology. And what are toxins in general? Toxins are basically poisons, and they have adverse effects on an organism or on the whole system. These toxins include chemicals, drugs, and also our diet, as well as there are some other physical factors like radiation, like ionizing radiation, like gamma radiation, UV light, the non-ionizing one, and some electromagnetic rays. Toxins are harmful even when they are extremely diluted. In some cases, even the billions or even the trillions of a gram can cause irreversible damage. Environmental toxicology especially deals with the interactions, transformations, fate, and effects of toxins in the biosphere. And that includes individual organisms, populations, communities, biomes, and ultimately the whole ecosystem or the biosphere. Toxic, this table tells us the top toxic substances, like in case of materials, we'll see arsenic, lead, mercury, vinyl chloride, PCBs, which are polychlorinated biphenyls, benzene, cadmium, benzopyrene, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, chloroform, DDT, and a lot more. So what are the sources of arsenic? That would be a treated lumber. What is the source of lead? Paints and gasolines, they contain lead. Even I've seen, I know that lead is contained in toys also. And then mercury is found in the combustion of the coal, vinyl chloride in plastics and industrial use. And PCBs are found in the electrical insulation, benzene in gasoline and industrial use, cadmium in batteries. So now if you see all these things that are the major sources, these materials we use pretty much on daily basis. We are using gas, we are using electrical insulation, we are using plastic, we are using all this on daily basis without realizing that how much are we exposing the environment and even ourselves to these hazardous substances, right? So this is how they crop into our daily lives. Now we are going to see how do these toxins affect us. So there are three types of substances that can get affected by these toxins. One is called allergens. Now, what are allergens? Allergens are substances that have the ability to activate our immune system. Okay, some allergens can act as antigens. And what are antigens? In general, word would mean any substance that can generate antibodies. Okay, and they can include pollen, bacteria, even dust particles. By antigen, we mean that these are foreign to our body. Okay, they can stimulate the production of specific antibodies because they are foreign to the white blood cells inside our body. Basically, it means that white blood cells are do not know that white blood cells do not recognize them as their own when they enter in our body. So that's why these antigens develop specific antibodies to fight against them. Make sense? So what are antibodies? Antibodies are basically proteins that are produced in our bodies which recognize them and bind them to foreign cells or chemicals. And basically they bind to these antigens, which are our foreign cells, right? And they will destroy them. And that's what we need. So they are our defense mechanisms, antibodies. Now, do you know about sick building syndrome? Sick building syndrome is a condition by which if a building where most people work or live, right, they can they that if it has very poorly vented indoor air, okay, there's no good ventilation, the indoor air can easily get contaminated by these chemicals or these allergens or chemicals like formaldehyde. Okay, and it's formaldehyde is a powerful sensitizer of our immune system, and it is widely used in wood products, insulation, glue, fabrics, plastics. Okay, and because of its broad usage, it can accumulate in higher concentrations in the indoor air because we use these things indoors, right? We are using plastics, we are using insulation. Its insulation is present inside our houses, right? So, and we use glue and other fabrics. So all these things are present. So that's why its concentration can become very high and thousands times higher than what it is in the outdoor air. That's why if you have a building that is not vented properly, right? If you do not have proper doors, windows, or in your ACs, you do not have very good outlets where the bad the contaminated air can go outside of your house, then you are going to become prone to this sick building syndrome, right? If and that what are the symptoms of sick building syndrome? How do you tell that this person can have sick building syndrome. So it is recognized by having a high amount of allergies, headaches, and having a chronic fatigue. It doesn't appear that the person is, having some kind of illness, but they are like chronically fatigued all the time, and they are allergic, they have allergies, they are always having headaches. That's a sign that this could be a sick building syndrome. So EPA has estimated that poor indoor air quality may cost this nation 60 billion a year and reduce productivity because of the contamination of our indoor air by molds, but not just by chemicals but also molds. Molds can also proliferate really well inside, and carbon monoxide and nitrogen oxides, and of course formaldehyde that we already spoke about. These things are released by our carpets, insulation, plastics, building materials, and if someone is staying are working all the time indoors, they are very good victims of this sick building syndrome. Okay. Now, what are the other harmful agents that can affect us? These other harmful agents can be put in these categories like neurotoxins, mutagens, carcinogens, and teratogens. What are neurotoxins? Neurotoxins are special class of poisons that can specifically attack our nervous system, meaning our brain and spinal cord, because brain and spinal cord has these neurons called nerve cells. Okay, mutagens are the agents like radiation, ionizing or non-ionizing, like UV light or gamma rays, and some other chemicals. They can cause sudden changes in our DNA, in our genetic material, and those changes can be harmful. And once some harmful gene comes in our DNA, definitely when organisms reproduce, that gene can be transferred to the next generation. So that's how mutagens can be so harmful. Now, what are teratogens? These are the chemicals that specifically cause abnormalities during the embryonic development. Okay, that means when a child is in mother's womb, that's when, if the mother got exposed to these chemicals that can be considered teratogens, then that's going to have an ill effect on the health of the embryo and ultimately the baby. So other carcinogens, of course, the chemicals or substances that can produce cancers, like there are some products like DNA, I'm sorry, DDT, carcinogens. They can result into malignant tumors, and they can cause invasive and out of control cell growth. And the cancer is basically now is the second leading cause of death in the United States and killing 500,000 people every day. So uh, EPA has listed 20 compounds that are the greatest human carcinogens. Now, endocrine disruptors are also a certain kind of chemicals that can affect our hormones. And this category includes chemicals that, like DDT and PCBs, these can be persistently present inside an environment, right? And they can interfere with the normal growth and development and physiology in a variety of animals at a very low doses. These chemicals are also called environmental estrogens or androgens because they can affect the reproductive health of the females and may also result in the feminization of the males, because these are basically messing up with the hormones. So you guys saw that in your Rachel Carson's lab, the harmful effect of the DDT. That could be one of the examples of this endocrine disruptor hormones. Now, how do these steroid or hormones affect the cell? So here we can see that these hormone carriers are there in the blood or the plasma. They deliver these regulatory molecules to the surface of the cells. So when they are these, this is plasma estrogen carrier, it's delivered on the surface of the cell, and you can see that here it will cross this cell membrane, and from here it will go inside the cell. So there are some intracellular receptors, like in this case estrogen receptor is there. It is going to accept this. Intracellular receptor will accept this estrogen carrier, and it will deliver this hormone to the nucleus. Now once they are inside the nucleus, they are going to bind to the DNA, and they are going to regulate the DNA expression. Okay, so these receptors bind. So what they do, estrogen like compounds can either block the uptake of the endogenous hormones, or they can substitute hormone to disrupt the gene expression, which we mean that they will disrupt the protein synthesis. So that's how they give us our whole gene expression is altered now. It is changed now. The compound that we are hoping to found, or a certain kind of protein which would form in normal situation, normal condition. Now, instead of that, now this mRNA is going to produce a non-estrogen protein, and that's how it causes the harmful or disruption of the gene expression. Now, how do these toxic substances move inside the system? Okay, so these we can think of both individuals and an ecosystems. Okay, as we are these two compartments that are interacting with each other, and we can see how these chemicals move based on their size, their solubility, their stability, and reactivity. So we can see these are the factors that are responsible for the environmental toxicity, like chemical composition and reactivity, physical characteristics like solubility and state, presence of impurities or contaminants, stability and storage, availability of a vehicle like a solvent to carry them. Now, other factors that are related to exposure are dose, route, and duration of frequency of exposure, factors related to the organism, resistant to the uptake, storage, cell permeability, ability to metabolize, inactivate, or sequester or eliminate the agent, tendency to activate or alter the non-toxic substances so they become toxic, concurrent infections, or physical or chemical stress. The genetic characteristics of the organism, the nutritional status of the subject also matters, the age, sex, body weight, and their maturity. Also, these are some of the factors that can affect the toxicity of these toxins. Now, some compounds dissolve in water and other dissolves in oil. So the chemicals are divided into two major groups based on their solubility. So water-soluble compounds will move rapidly because they can easily dissolve in water, and water is omnipresent. It's present everywhere. So they can move very rapidly. But the molecules that are fat-soluble or oil-soluble, they generally need a carrier to move through the environment. But once inside the body, the oil-soluble toxins penetrate readily into the tissues and cells because the membranes that enclose the cells are themselves made up of phospholipid bilayer. And what is that? That is fat. So our membranes themselves have a lot of lipid in them. So once inside the cell, these oil soluble materials are likely to accumulate and they will be stored in lipid deposits where they may be protected from the breakdown and they can persist inside the cell for many years. So how do we respond to the exposure of these toxins? There are many routes, like we said, for these toxins to enter our bodies. We have airborne toxins. They generally cause more ill health than any other exposure. Of course, food, water, and skin contact can also expose us to a variety of hazardous chemicals. Age matters and general health matters. A healthy adult may be insensitive to doses, may be insensitive to smaller doses, but those smaller doses can be very dangerous to a immunocompromised person or to a young child because their immune system is not that built in that young age, right, as compared to a healthy adult, right? Now, in among children, lead is considered as the most common toxin because lead has been found to be associated not just in paints but also in children toys. And as we know, children do. We're going to talk about the bioaccumulation and biomagnification. So cells have this mechanism where they can selectively absorb and store toxins in their bodies, and that's called bioaccumulation. So materials that are normally dilute in the environment, but when they reach inside the cells or tissues of an organism, can reach to dangerous levels. Toxic substances can also be magnified through the food web. Now, biomagnification, it occurs when a toxic burden of a large number of organisms at a trophic level is accumulated and concentrated by a predator at a higher trophic level. So if we look at this figure 8.12, this is a food chain in the aquatic ecosystem. The toxic burden of large number of organisms like the phytoplankton and bacteria is accumulated and concentrated by a predator at the higher level, which is the eagle. So if you see let's say if these phytoplanktons, they consume toxics like mercury, right, or other heavy metals, then their predators, which are the small fishes or other zooplanktons, they will collect and retain the toxins from many of these organisms and building up higher concentrations of toxics inside their body. Now, the top carnivores in this food chain, like the fish eating birds and even humans who will consume on these fishes, can accumulate high toxic levels of this mercury and can suffer from ill effects. So that's what we understand by biomagnification, how the smallest dose of the toxic inside the lower trophic level can become magnified, okay, at the higher trophic level. Now, what are the pollutants, some organic pollutants that are especially harmful? So many substances, they degrade when they are exposed to extreme heat, air or wind, this can destroy them to convert them into inactive forms, right? Some materials are persistent and can last for years as they cycle through ecosystems. This will include heavy metals like lead and mercury. These heavy metals, these are responsible for destroying the nerve cells. And many organic compounds, such as PVCs in plastics and chlorinated hydrocarbon pesticides, they are very resistant to the degradation by extreme wind, air, or temperatures. So it just depends what kind of the behavior these pollutants, these toxins exhibit. It differs from one type to another. Now, chemical interactions can also increase the toxicity. When we talk about interactions, then like how two chemicals can interact with each other. So, in that category, we have antagonistic reactions and we have synergistic reactions. When we talk about antagonistic reactions, we can see that these are going to interfere with the effects of one of the chemicals in the presence of another. And there can be they're basically going to counter the effect for each other. That's why they are antagonistic reactions. And some materials can have additive effects if they are present together inside an organism, like vitamin E and A. If they are present together inside an organism, they can reduce the response to some carcinogens inside the organism's body. Okay, and if rats are exposed to both lead and arsenic, it has been shown that twice the toxicity of only one of the elements is present. So the greatest concern is about synergistic effects. So synergistic effects or synergism is an interaction in which one toxic substance will exaggerate or exacerbate the effects of other. For example, if a person is exposed to asbestos at like at their work, which is called occupational asbestos exposure, it is known that it can increase the rate of lung cancer 20 times. Smoking increases the lung cancer rates by the same amount, but asbestos workers, okay, who smoke will have a 400 times increase in their cancer rates. So you see how this effect has basically exaggerated to 400 times as opposed to just 20-fold when they were individually present, right? Now, toxicity and risk assessment. So, Swiss scientist Paracelsus said that the dose makes the poison. This means that almost everything can be toxic if it is at a high level. But if it is in smaller amount, it is diluted enough to be safe. This actually constitutes the basic principle of toxicology: how a material is delivered and at what rate it is delivered is what that determines the toxicity. For example, if you eat table salt, sodium chloride, right, in small quantities, it's an essential mineral that your body needs, right? But if you were to consume 1 kilogram of sodium chloride, okay, then obviously that is going to cause adverse effects in your body. Your body cannot handle that high amount of the salt, right? We usually test toxic effects on lab animals Especially we use the rats or the bunnies for these kind of experiments. So these are widely accepted toxicity tests, and these animals, the measured doses of a specific substance under controlled conditions is measured, and it commonly takes hundreds or even thousands of animals and thousands of dollars to thoroughly test the effects of toxic at very low doses. So, more humane toxicity tests can be done by using computer simulations or check or cell cultures or other substitutes for whole living animals. That will help us, conduct more ethical experiments, and not sacrifice so many animals. Animal tested is complicated by differences in toxic sensitivity between individual animals. If we look at this graph, we can see that some members of a population may be very sensitive to a given toxin. See that? And while others are much less sensitive. Okay, we can see on this side of the uh, curve. The majority of the population is falling between these two extremes. Okay, so that's what uh, we have to remember, the probable variations in sensitivity to a toxin within the population. So this is a bell curve, basically. Very sensitive populations. Some members can be very sensitive, like even a dose of 0 to 10 ppm is going to cause death for them, and for others they are highly insensitive. Even a dose above um, 25 to 40 doesn't leave a very detrimental effect on them, but majority of the population will be somewhere in between these two extremes. So these dose response curves help us determine the toxicity, which can be called as lethal dose. Okay, so this is a convenient way to describe toxicity of a chemical, to determine the dose to which 50% here, if you see, of the test population is sensitive. Okay, then that is called LD50, lethal dose 50. If 50% of the rat population, according to this figure, is toxic to a certain chemical, then that would be considered a lethal dose. But there is a wide range of toxicity. It is useful to use group materials according to their relative toxicity. Like a moderately harmful toxin takes about 1 gram per kilogram of body weight to make a lethal dose. Very toxic materials take about 1/10 of that amount. Extremely toxic substances can take 1/10 or maybe just a few drops to kill most people. Super toxic chemicals are highly potent, and few micrograms, or which is millionth of a gram, is enough to uh, cause that, to make that as a lethal dose. Toxins can have two types of effects: acute or chronic. So, acute effects are caused by a single exposure to the toxin and result in an immediate health crisis. Okay, but chronic effects, even if you have, um, like, you can have long lasting effects, and a chronic effect can result from a single dose, or it can also result from a continuous or a repeated lethal exposure. Unlike acute effects, chronic effects usually are difficult to assess, and specific health risks, or they could be, it's difficult to assess specific health risks because there can be other factors, like depending on their age or the kind of immune system they have. If they are like immunocompromised or very aged population, very old people, it will have a, it will have a slightly different, it may have a slightly more exaggerated effect on them because of other underlying conditions as opposed to just the effect of the toxin. So that's why chronic effects are slightly difficult to assess because they are long lasting over the years, over many years, and we don't know if that person has reduced immunity, that's why they are showing those effects, or it's just the effects of that toxin. Risk assessment, the degree of toxicity varies widely. And what is hormesis? The complication in assessing risk uh, effect is that effects of low doses of some toxins and health hazards can be non-linear. They may be either more or less dangerous than it was otherwise predicted from exposure to higher doses. For example, low doses of DHEP, it's a chemical that is used for plastic. It can suppress activity of essential enzyme in the rat brain, but it is surprisingly because higher doses can stimulate this enzyme, right? But it was observed to have suppressed the activity of an enzyme in the rat's brain. Another intriguing example we would say is that normally we consider ionizing radiations to be a human carcinogen. That's what we believe. But we have seen that very, very low amounts of this radiation seems to protect against certain cancers. And that's why, a lot of cancer patients, they undergo radiation therapy, right? We know that. And we think that this thought is that very low radiation may stimulate the repair of the DNA along with some enzymes that can destroy the free radicals. And thus, activating these repair mechanisms may defend us from other unrelated hazards. And these types of nonlinear effects are called hormesis. Risk assessment, even if we know about some certainty how toxic a chemical in the laboratory test is, it is still difficult to determine its risk when it is out in the environment. So, risk is basically the probability of the harm times the probability of exposure if that chemical is released into the environment, right? So, many factors can complicate the movement and fate of the chemicals both around us and within our bodies. Sometimes the public perception of environmental hazards can be very inconsistent and with actual risks because it can be very, very skewed because of people's beliefs in certain perceptions, like most people will have difficulty in understanding these risks because these things are governed by like fallacies and their beliefs in religion or myths or that are generally spread in the society. So they, because of that, these conditions like social, political, and economic interest, they can downplay certain risks, but they can emphasize on other risks, what depending on what suits their agenda. And our personal experiences often are misleading because if whether when we have not personally experienced a bad outcome, we feel, oh, this may not happen to someone else also, right? This is very unlikely to occur because I was in that situation. I got exposed to this, but nothing happened to me. So maybe because, so that's why I'm saying that these personal experiences, these myths and fallacies can is not always rational, right? One example that I can give: in WHO campaign to eradicate polio worldwide was basically thwarted by some religious leaders in Nigeria. So the polio is still widespread there because they claimed that oral vaccination in US is a plot to spread AIDS and infertility among the Muslim population. So that's why polio is still not eradicated there. It is still present there because that's what they believe. So those people who are religious, they are gonna, um, you know, think that that's what is the right thing to believe. So how much risk is acceptable is most people will tolerate a higher probability of occurrence of an event if the harm caused by that event is low. And conversely, harm of a greater severity is acceptable only at low levels of frequency. But what does the EPA says? The EPA assumes that a risk of 1 in 1 million is acceptable for most environmental hazards. For activities that we enjoy, we often are willing to accept the greater risks rather than, this general threshold, right? General relative risks of death from various causes, like there are six of odds, 1 in 10%. The odd is 6 times that a person will die from heart attack, and 7 from cancer, and 26 from chronic respiratory disease, or 86 from suicide, right? And if you see in this, you will see that you will notice that you are 50 times more likely to die in an auto accident than in a plane accident. So that basically ends our chapter, and these are our takeaway points. So, takeaway points are like, we have definitely made good progress in reducing some of the worst diseases and have that were, clogging the human population, like, many diseases like polio, pertussis, um, mumps, measles, smallpox, right? So, but at the same time, we do have challenges like those some emerging diseases that we were talking about, and some new infectious diseases that are cropping up. But that doesn't mean that we were successful in reducing some of the worst diseases, like polio and others, because we have good vaccinations for them. That's how we control them. However, there are chronic conditions that once were confined to richer societies, but now they have become leading health problems everywhere, like diabetes, like cardiovascular diseases, cancers, right? New emergent diseases are appearing at an increasing rate with increased international travel, globalization. Diseases are spreading around the globe very soon, and COVID-19 is the perfect example. And modern industry is introducing thousands of new chemicals every year. Most of them aren't really studied thoroughly for long-term effects, and that's where our efforts should be focused. Okay, so this uh, ends up our chapter 8 on toxicology. Okay, thank you.